your reaction to this talk may be slightly like people's reaction to Marmite. Although the nice thing about Marmite is that some people like it. So, well, it's a very great honor to be invited to give this commencement address on this joyful occasion. I have to confess, I'm not quite sure why Joshua asked me. My own educational career did not get off to a terribly good start. My school reports left a certain amount to be desired. One from my French master said, "By the time this student has mastered French, he'll be too old to cross the channel," which was not encouraging. Another one on my general performance and indeed behavior simply read, "Off the rails and halfway down the embankment." One occasion I took my school report card home and my father said, "Why is this report card all wet?" And I said, "Well, because all the grades are below sea level." If I may address the new graduates here, what you've been engaged in during your time of study here is of the utmost importance. In fact, I would say it is of ultimate importance, because fundamentally, you have been obeying Jesus' command to love God with all your mind. When asked what the greatest commandment was, he replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind." Now, he's of course quoting an ancient Jewish piece of writing called the Shema, which was absolutely central to Jewish faith. Jewish children were taught to make it the last thing they said before they went to sleep at night, and Jewish adults would try and make it the last words they spoke before they died. Tricky to get that one right, but worth a try. But notice that Jesus slightly changes the Shema. The Shema says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." Jesus adds, "and with all your mind." He adds that. He finds the Shema incomplete without a reference to the mind. For Jesus, if we're not loving God with our minds, our response to God is insufficient, and therefore our humanity is depleted. God made us to be rational beings, and if we're not cultivating a committed life of the mind, we are distorting the image of God which we display to the world. We're warping how other people see God, how they experience God, how they respond to God, or indeed how they don't. But notice too the context of Jesus' words here. In Luke's version, it's Jesus' answer to the question, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" This is not an optional extra. This is not just something that intellectual types might like to do. This isn't like school exams where candidates must attempt any three. No, this is what the life of the age to come looks like. It's an essential component of faithfulness. It's part of what it is to live. Now, obviously, that won't involve doing formal education for many people, but academic work is just a structured way of doing what we're all called to do, which is to use our minds in the service of God and of our neighbor. That is what you have set yourselves to do and what you have been doing, and there is nothing more important. It's a vital part of our humanity. I don't know if you remember the Far Side cartoons from way back, but there was one particularly that caught my attention, was of two amoebas. And Mrs. Amoeba said to Mr. Amoeba, stimulus response, can't you ever think?" Well, amoebas can't think. Some animals can up to a point, but human beings, it's part of how we're made, and it's part of what we're for. We bring that mental equipment to survival, our battle for survival. Why should we not bring it to our relationship with God and our service of others, asks Jesus. So hard thinking is part of our calling as Christians, and it's part of our constitution as human beings. It's also vital for our service of the church, because the church is currently losing the battle of ideas. If you go into any ordinary bookshop, you'll see umpteen copies of Richard Dawkins' books on display. You're very unlikely to find any of the Christian responses to his work by Alistair McGrath or Keith Ward or Francis Collins or whoever it may be. It's not that there aren't good Christian thinkers at the top level. There are, though we always need more of them. It's that there aren't enough thinking Christians who are intellectually engaged enough to buy those books, so it doesn't pay the bookshops to put them out there. And there aren't enough thinking Christians in the media and journalism and university departments. There aren't enough thinking Christian artists and composers and scriptwriters and comedians who are intellectually equipped enough to present the Christian faith as a credible option to our contemporaries. It currently just does not occur to our contemporaries to turn to the church for wisdom on any of the issues and challenges that confront us in the modern world. We're losing the battle of ideas, not because the Christian faith doesn't stack up, but because we just aren't engaging. And we're not engaging because we haven't equipped ourselves to engage. You have equipped yourselves to engage. Your period of study has trained your mind in some of the key intellectual virtues. And I want to look briefly at two of those key intellectual virtues. First, the intellectual virtue of being open. I haven't always been a theologian. I once tried to be a self-portrait painter, but in the end it just wasn't me. So I thought of commissioning a sculptor to do a bronze bust of me when I retire, but that's to get ahead of myself. It's the Marmite thing. Actually, a friend of mine baked a cake recently and decorated it with an extraordinary painting of herself in different coloured icing sugar and proceeded to eat the whole cake without giving any of it to anybody else. She's so full of herself. Every human being is a self-portrait of God. That's where it was coming from. There's always a reason. It's always a reason for it. Every human being is a self-portrait of God. That's what it is to be made in the image of God. And therefore, there is something I can learn about God from every single human being. As a Christian, every person I meet can expand my understanding of God. As a Christian academic, any book or article I read, even if it is written by somebody deeply opposed to the Christian faith, I come to it expecting to learn something that will expand my understanding and my knowledge of God. That's the understanding on which Scripture itself operates. The wisdom literature in the Old Testament, Book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Book of Job, borrows extensively from the wisdom tradition of Egypt and Babylonia, places that did not hold to the God of Israel in any way, shape, or form. Psalm 29 is almost entirely taken from Phoenician Baal worship, that Baal worship that we are warned against throughout the Old Testament. Where they see something true, they will take it and adopt it and embrace it. Not uncritically, but they will take it. Paul quotes pagan philosophers and poets in his speech on the Areopagus in Athens. In him we live and move and have our being. There's a quotation from Epimenides. We are his offspring. There's a quotation from Aratus. There's an attractive openness here. The Bible expects us to find wisdom and understanding outside the people of God, and when we do, to welcome it and to adopt it and to incorporate it. It expects us to be promiscuous gatherers of truth, garnering truth wherever we can find it and whoever has said it. Every human being is made in the image of God. And therefore, one of the key intellectual virtues is openness to learning from every person I meet, every lecture I listen to, every book I read. It's more of a challenge in some cases than others, but that is what my expectation, my hope, and my prayer. The second intellectual virtue, and this is one that Dr. Anik referred to earlier, is the intellectual virtue of being critical. Because unfortunately, human beings aren't just made in the image of God, they're also fallen. So you can't just read off what God is like from one of the creatures made in his image, because that image has become tarnished. Not destroyed, but seriously damaged. Because we are fallen, our lives and our lips tell lies about God as well as truth. Because we are fallen, we are fallible. Oliver Cromwell, who had a difficult relationship with a former King Charles in our country, said to members of Parliament at one point, "I beg you by the bowels of Christ to consider it possible that you might be mistaken." It's advice I wish he'd taken to heart a little more himself, but it's good advice. We have a statement of academic values at Wycliffe which says this: to acknowledge our fallibility is to acknowledge the need for every position to be subjected to serious and multifaceted critique. If we're all prone to error, then criticism is a gift that helps us to see where and how we may be wrong. One of my colleagues at Wycliffe, Professor N.T. Wright, the New Testament scholar, often says in his lectures, half of what I say is probably wrong. The trouble is I don't know which half. Well, there's a very easy way to find out where you're wrong, and that is to set the critical dogs on it, to expose it to the critique of others. They will soon find the weak spots. I won't, because I'm too close to it, I'm too committed to it, I'm too enamored of my own position and my own thinking to see the faults in it. Those of you who are gardeners will know the piece of advice that you should let your enemies prune your roses. You won't be vicious enough on your own cherished roses, but your enemy will do the job very nicely. It's the same with criticism. I may not critique my own work deeply enough or radically enough, but other people will. And therefore, every awkward question, every inconvenient piece of evidence, every devastating argument against my position is my friend, because it helps me to refine and make less inadequate the things I believe and the theology I adopt. Apparently, I just discovered that they've developed a computer program to write a musical version of An Inconvenient Truth. It's running a new algorithm, apparently. Truths that are inconvenient to our position are the ones to which we must particularly attend. Our instinct is to ignore them, or preferably not to hear them in the first place. But our training as academics and our calling as Christians is to allow them to disrupt our current thinking and to prod us into deeper thinking. Thomas Aquinas said, "We must love them both, those whose opinions we share and those whose opinions we reject. For both have labored in the search for truth, and both have helped us in the finding of it." So we need to be open because everyone is made in the image of God, and we need to be critical because everyone is fallen. You have been trained in those intellectual virtues. You've been made to engage with people you strongly disagree with. You've been forced to subject your own views and your own position to the critique of others, and you now get to use that trained mind in the service of God and of his world. Is this telling me that I've got 1 minute left or something? So there are two members of the Flat Earth Society, which has members all around the globe. And at the pearly gates, they get the chance to ask God any questions that they want and get a truthful answer from him. So one flat earther asks God, "Is the earth flat?" To which God answers, "No." And the flat earther looks at the other one and says, "This goes higher than we thought." You are going out as people trained in the use of reason to serve a world that has largely jettisoned reason in favor of tribal affiliation. You are going out to serve a world which tends to believe what fits its worldview. You're going out to serve a world which decides what to believe not by applying reason to it, but by whether it supports what they already believe. You're going out to serve a world in which people increasingly only listen to those who they know will tell them what they want to hear. My sisters and brothers, it should not be so amongst us. Practice what you've learned at Omega. Be open to learning from everyone, even those outside your tribe, especially those outside your tribe. And be critical of what you hear from everyone, even those inside your tribe. That is how you will best serve both the world and the church. That is how you will love God with your mind. And that is how you will become beacons of balance, sanity, and humanity wherever God leads you.